This video is a long time coming. To clarify, I haven't spent a whole year straight working on a Dead by Daylight video, but multiple times throughout the last year I have tried to set the record straight on how I feel about Dead by Daylight. But why now? Well, there's context to that. See, both Rasputin and ProTD have made these little videos going over their top 10 most played games on Steam. I'm not going to exactly do that, but it did get me looking at my own. And what is even going on here? I think if you saw this in isolation, you'd get a very different impression of my taste in gaming than I do. It's very skewed towards competitive multiplayer, which, don't get me wrong, is an area I spend a lot of time in, but this makes it look so much worse than it actually is. Take, for instance, right at the bottom, those 40 hours on Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Roughly 10 to 15 of those was morbid curiosity and me being an Arkham fan. The other 25 was recording for a video which I never made because it's a really bad habit I've gotten into. Then you've got those hours on Rainbow Six Siege and Street Fighter 6. Those are rookie numbers. You know if you play those games. That's like barely scratching the surface. Especially Siege, you might as well have just done the tutorial. Street Fighter 6 is something, and fighting games in general, I'm just generally more invested in, but I've historically had quite bad internet problems, so that's why those hours are a bit lower than I thought they'd be. Those 45 hours in TF2, those are from like 10 years ago, though it's always fun to go back to, right? It's Team Fortress 2. Who doesn't like Team Fortress 2? Kind of a similar situation with Counter-Strike. Not that I enjoy it, I actually don't. I just played it with my friends. But I haven't played since Global Offensive, so the top half definitely makes a little more sense as we get into like the Arkham Origins portion, which is still a bit strange actually. I've got a lot of hours in the Arkham games, specifically City and Origins. A lot more than that. I was actually mostly a console gamer for most of my life, up until like 6 or 7 years ago when I got a proper PC setup. So all the Arkham games would actually be a lot higher on this list were it not just my Steam hours. I don't think I really need to explain Marvel Rivals. If anything, those hours are quite low, let's be real. But the top 3, Jesus H. Christ. I want it on record that my time in Destiny 2 was spent around Lightfall, and I played it entirely off the back of the honeymoon period. I put all those 100 hours in like a month, maybe 2. I played like a third of the final shape, and then the spark just fizzled out and died, and I haven't touched it since, which from what I can see might have been for the best. Marvel Snap is actually the one game that's way worse than this could possibly indicate. I have at least double those hours on mobile, but I haven't played it in ages. I can't deal with it anymore. The progression and the monetization, it's gotten so dodgy, it's impossible to keep up unless you put an egregious amount of money into that game, and I can't deal with that anymore, which is sad because I do genuinely love the game. But then, number 1, encroaching on almost double the hours of anything else, Dead by Daylight. One thing I'm sure you'll have noticed by now is that I don't have a lot of games with like a really high hour count. This is what I meant by this really captures a certain corner of my gaming taste, because typically speaking, I'm actually a game hopper, like big time. I play a certain amount of a game, I get my fill, I normally finish like a story game or something, and then I move on to whatever I'm playing next. There are very few games, even outside of Steam, that I have with more hours than on this list. Maybe stuff like Final Fantasy XIV and dare I say, League of Legends. But this thing, I started playing DBD a little before the first Resident Evil chapter came out. I'm part of that big spike in player count the game saw. I played the game religiously for a good month or 2. Tons of super fun survivor games with my friends. You know, that earlier phase where the game is still kind of spooky and there's a good tension to it before I naturally made the progression into being a killer main. But I stopped playing consistently before Project W came out. I mean, I still hop on to the PTB to try out the new killer stuff and whatnot, but that's about it. And despite all of that, it still has my highest hours in Steam. And you know what's worse? It's not like I've left the game behind. It's probably one of my most watched things on YouTube, despite the fact that I don't really play it that much. You know, like Ots, Spooky Loops, Hens, Jerem. I'm slinking around, lurking in the shadows type of deal. Sometimes it feels like I still play it through some kind of like eternally online osmosis, like I'm feeling it through them. DBD is stressful, constantly fucked in some way, and has a community committed to eating itself alive, things I often choose to walk away from in service of more fun things. So why, oh why, on God's green earth is Dead by Daylight of all the things the exception? Well, like I said, that's something I've been trying to figure out for the last year. So let's find out, because sometimes I don't even know myself. If you play DBD, you'll know it's only too easy to point out the game's flaws at every level of its existence, it feels like especially recently. As the game has grown, a lot of its issues have been exacerbated, whether that be balancing, which they never seem to have a strong grip on, community interaction, especially with the GG Go Next epidemic seem to be at an all-time high, and just the game's stability. It's absolutely riddled with bugs and game-breaking issues. It feels like there is always something getting kill-switched. Even at a base design level, DBD has a lot of issues that have gone unfixed, from map design to playstyle issues like slugging and camping. This is where the slow responsive behavior interactive has intersected with their mounting backlog of problems, never mind the cheaters.
You never stop cheaters, just get it, bro. Cheaters always win, just understand.
And a lot of these issues can get in the game's way, namely the fact that the killer and survivor sides feel a bit at war sometimes, which can create a very unwelcoming environment. But like I said, if you play DBD, you're only too aware of this. It's the daily content cycle. It is the experience in a large portion of your matches, and it's only too easy to point these things out. I think that's actually why my previous attempts to make this video have failed. I think they became too drowned in the negative, too obsessed with the problems. I'm naturally drawn to issues in games, not in a rageful way. I just like to understand them, to consider why they're there, and consider possible solutions. But if you pump a script about a game you love full of issues, it comes off closer to a dismantling, and that runs counter to what I want this channel to be. It's always been about sharing what makes these pieces of media really interesting, what makes them so imaginative. That's the whole reason that's the name, plus it's kind of ironic. And every video I've made that doesn't do that is one I've regretted. It's why I've probably canned more videos than I've made in the last year. Which is why I want to focus in this video on what makes Dead by Daylight good, what it has going for it at that sort of base level, because I think sometimes it goes taken for granted or it's been buried under all the problems, which is understandable. I just think it's time that maybe we balance the scales a little bit. Because if you really think about it, we're kind of lucky this game even exists. It may be on its way to 9 years, but DBD has come an exceedingly long way in that time. Go back and watch some footage from the first handful of years and you will see a game you barely recognise. It has a much foggier atmosphere and a grungy colour palette. The roster is limited to mostly, if not entirely, original killers, and perks are somehow even more busted than they are now. It is a game that chose to emulate the slasher horror experience in an asymmetrical multiplayer video game. This is a niche of a niche of a niche, but by virtue of a few key factors, DBD has gone on to be the game we play today. Part of that is just reaching more players. That can have its own downsides, of course, but by increasing the reach that DBD has for really cool licensed characters like Ghostface, Michael Myers, or the myriad of Resident Evil characters that dragged me so deep into the game, and other things like cosmetics and crossovers, it allows the game to justify its own existence and to persist. Obviously, the game's original content is also really cool and keeps providing fresh experiences for the player base to play around with, but it's those licenses that keep new players coming in and drag returning players back kicking and screaming. You can establish a recognisable fantasy with licensed characters, make a kit that fits the image people have of that character, and they'll be so much more incentivized to play them. Doing this for Nemesis is literally how I got into Killer, and occasionally they'll do some really cool shit, like making Chucky work in third person, or introducing the idea of multiple powers with Vecna. More players means more money means more stuff, and more people to make said stuff. I think you can see it a lot with the recent focus on alternative game modes and the reinvigorated interest in the game's long-term health, something that's a lot easier to justify working on when you have a large player count to maintain. Then there's the game's theme, that gritty 80s slasher vibe. It's one I personally get a real kick out of as someone that's getting into slasher movies about the same time I started playing the game. From the Cold Run Farm to RPD, these maps have substantial design issues, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't love the experience of them. But even more importantly, DBD is not limited by this theme. It has since expanded to incorporate many different aspects of the horror genre, such as sci-fi, and even has some surprisingly complex lore to tie it all together. I'm a weirdly big fan of when a game explains its conceit with its lore. It's like, I find it the cherry on top of a good game mode. It doesn't need to be there, but it's nice when it is. For Dead by Daylight, that is the Trial, some bizarre pocket dimension type thing in control of the Entity, a rather spiky higher power that likes to feed from sacrifice, but not just any sacrifice. It has to be earned, and to that end, the Entity has collected killers from across different times, places, and realities, and repeatedly hunted these survivors, something that is reinforced every time a survivor kicks the bucket. It is an excellent excuse to take these disparate forms of horror and mesh them together. Not that you need an excuse, but it's nice to have one when Freddy Krueger is chasing Nicolas Cage. Of course, the biggest benefit of all of this is that Dead by Daylight isn't tied to any one source material. Dead by Daylight has had a number of competitors throughout the years, several launching around the same time and many more being recent casualties. From Friday the 13th all the way to VHS and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. For one reason or another, they have all failed. It is my long-held belief that a significant part of this equation is that they were limited by their source material. As beloved as these franchises are, in the world of live service and constant updates, there is only so far a game based on Evil Dead or Texas Chainsaw can go. Yes, something like Friday the 13th has a lot of entries and is a very beloved franchise, but the game has to emulate the specific experience of that franchise. And there's only so many entries you can pull from, and a lot of those entries won't be seen so favourably or may have been completely forgotten, placing a serious cap on how much you can actually add to the game before people simply will not care. And the unfortunate truth is that these days, gameplay only gets you so far. Dead by Daylight does not suffer from this particular limitation. Instead of attempting to emulate any one franchise, it can get to the core of the matter and emulate the entire genre. Never mind the fact that it can and does reach out to any horror adjacent IP to convince them to join the fog and potentially bring a chunk of their player base with them. The only thing limiting Dead by Daylight is time and licensing fees. I can practically hear Freddy Fazbear laughing as Springtrap chases Alan Wake through Badham Preschool. However, what I consider to be the biggest factor in Dead by Daylight's success, flying firmly in the face of what I said mere moments ago, is that core gameplay loop. The difference between DBD and those would-be competitors is that Dead by Daylight's gameplay starts simple and branches out with considerable depth and complexity, while those other games made several mistakes along the way that kind of hampered their longevity, shall we say. Whether that be poor balancing, being too convoluted or one-sided, or maybe the gameplay wasn't the problem and some other factor, some external factors, brought it down elsewise. Dead by Daylight's goals are simple, a necessity in asymmetrical multiplayer. Survivors are attempting to power generators, and the killer speaks for itself. It is a very easy thing to grasp, and is about the only thing the tutorial used to actually teach you. I don't know if it got any better or not. It might be worse for all I know. Then you introduce the macro elements. The killer is statistically, smile, stronger than any individual survivor. That's why there is 4 of them and 1 of us. So for survivors, it's important to make use of the time while you have one of your besties fleeing for their life, and the killer is trying to be as efficient as possible to not give survivors that time. Add on top of that the different ways the game is affected by each killer's unique power. The fact that healing against a legion is a matter of strategy versus the "oh fuck, the hillbilly is coming this way." Then you've got items for the survivors, allowing you to repair generators faster, heal your teammates more efficiently, or blind the killer at a pallet because stupid add-ons, see what I did there, and the possible 20 perks that can be present in a single game, and you have a lot of factors influencing the game in both very visible and invisible ways, and the ways they interact can often be unexpected. Never mind the way each map can impact the way you play. Gideon Meat Plant, for example, may be a hellhole for most killers as the birthplace of every pallet you've ever seen, but Nemesis has seen worse. These factors are introduced to you fairly slowly. At the start you won't have a lot of this stuff unlocked, or you won't need to have to worry about a lot of these systems, which allows you the time to focus on getting the hang of just the base mechanics. But as you climb the slightly dookie MMR system, that deeper knowledge becomes ever so more important. But it's that complexity and depth that allows the game to stay fresh and interesting between games, and in many ways is why it's so frustrating to learn, but that's a whole other issue. Dead by Daylight is one of the games I've had the most satisfaction out of learning. All the intricacies and tricks you can employ, the awareness you develop as you feel yourself improving. It truly is a task to run out of things to learn in this game, especially as you can put in well over 100 hours before you stop getting the tooltip that warns you you're playing against the twins. For those that did not understand the joke, you get a tooltip about which killer you're facing the first 3 times you play them. The twins are so unpopular, you can put in 100 hours before you've played them 3 times. That was the joke. Onward! And all of these aspects coalesce in the basest, most integral part of Dead by Daylight's gameplay loop. And this is what I keep coming back to, the most likely accidental stroke of genius that in my opinion this game lives and dies on. Of course the game is 4 versus 1 and you'll only tend to find 2 of those individuals in a chase at any given time, though stranger things have happened. Get it? Because he's from Stranger Things. You get a great macro game out of the mismatched sides, and the game undeniably doesn't work without it as it creates that larger sense of cat and mouse. But I find the game's bigger issues, the game's wider, more encompassing issues, tend to come from the difficulty of balancing the 4 versus 1. But the 1v1, that's the good shit. It is obnoxiously simple on the surface, going back to my point about DBD starting with simplicity. The survivor attempts to run from the killer for as long as possible with the sort of inherent notion that eventually the killer will win, each second acting as further value for the survivors. It's why people have made a competitive game mode out of the 1 versus 1 chases. Doesn't stay quite that simple for long though, does it? You start with simple obstructions. The maps are made of tiles, typically comprised of walls, breakable or otherwise, windows, and pallets. The survivors may not be able to fight back in a traditional sense, but they are not powerless. Walls can be used to manipulate line of sight, simpler for survivors with their third-person camera. Windows can be vaulted much faster by survivors than killers, normally speaking, and it's something that killers have to acknowledge and adjust to. The same goes for pallets, but they have a bit more inbuilt interaction. Pallets can be dropped. Done so at the correct time will stun the killer. Even without the stun, the pallet still creates a blockage that takes the time to break, leaving the killer with a choice: break the pallet, giving the survivor time to gain distance on you, or attempt to outplay it. Introducing the mind games. The mind games. What the fuck? Why did I say it like that? Mind games are one of the best parts of any chase, as you win the pallet 50-50 17 times in a row. Did you predict the vault correctly? Is the killer going to swing for the window? Is this blight about to DC? Yes. It is some of the purest skill expression in Dead by Daylight. How you choose the path, to predict the path of the cat or the mouse, even just how well you know the map and its potential layouts, and it only gets deeper from there. Extenuating circumstances aside, the killer always produces a red stain as a cone in the direction they are facing. It's a big red "the killer is looking at me" indicator, and it can be very helpful when a killer is chasing you around a tight corner. So what if the killer were to simply turn around? Learning to manipulate your red stain is a nice simple trick you learn quite early in the Killer Handbook for Killers by John Killer, be it to hide how close you really are, or to bait a moment of hesitation or a double back from a survivor. You can learn swing distances and come to a second nature understanding of how many times you can run a loop before you have to drop the pallet. How far can you run, and how does Bloodlust change that? The timings for endurance effects, noticing giveaways for what perks are in the game and playing around them, or just deducing who the killer is the second you load in because one of those things is right in front of you. A lot of this stuff is on the earlier side. It's what you spend your first 100 or 200, hours learning piece by piece, and likely with what's Starver on your second monitor. But then you start getting into the really weird matchup specific tricks, like crouch taking a demo for instance, or Nemesis at Windows, getting the timing right to escape a locker after a Leatherface tantrum. The copious amounts of stuff like this is why you're still considered a newer player with 1,000 hours. Of course, there used to be more, like literally any trick with a flashlight that wasn't a standard save. I will never forget seeing that you could interrupt Nurse Blinks with a flashlight, and I'm immensely sad they got rid of that. They almost got rid of Oni flicks too, they were this close, like they got rid of Wesker's ability to bounce or slide off of objects. It always saddens me when behaviour does this. There is a lot going on in DBD, no doubt about it, and it certainly can be quite intimidating for new players. I agree that they should have better onboarding and continue to take the frustration out of the user experience, especially in their menus and progression. But I didn't keep playing Dead by Daylight because it was simple. Sure, I hopped in for the first time because it was. Fix generator, run from killer, chase them with a flashlight because it's funny. Yeah, I've been there, done that. But I stuck around for the almost relentless depth and relative freedom the game offers. On paper at least, you can play a bunch of games against the same killer and the outcome will be a little different every time, because of how well you know the killer, because of how well the killer knows the killer, or what perks they brought and how they interact with your perks or your items. It's also interesting to take in a way that's a lot more chaotic and individually influenced than something like a MOBA. Obviously, in reality, it's all too common to come across the same killer with the same build, especially when certain characters are really strong, but we're not talking about that here. We're talking about the base of DBD, the foundations they created that allowed them to come this far in the first place. But therein lies the problem, doesn't it, with the game, with this whole script. I stopped playing. I can't bring myself to play consistently anymore because the game is not just those foundations. It is the community, and it is behavior interactive. One of my flaws as a person is that I am rarely satisfied with casual enjoyment. I need to really get into the thick of it. I need to understand it. I need to understand how other people react to it. I need to watch it change over time and become something else entirely. It's why I stopped playing Destiny. I read the dev blogs, I watch the anniversary live streams, and I play the PTB, and I see the things come out with the same issues they had in the PTB, as if the PTB wasn't, to see what problems there were. PTB. Rest in peace, Houndmaster. I started playing when the first Resident Evil chapter was on the way. I cannot stress how excited I was and how grateful I am that Nemesis helped me break that pretty sizable barrier to enjoying Killer. But the Resident Evil chapter released with a map. Raccoon City Police Department, a very faithful rendition of the one seen in Resident Evil 2 Remake. It's a very nice looking map, and it was kill switched almost immediately and remained that way for days, maybe weeks. I can't remember, and I'm struggling to find it. When this happened originally, it didn't really bother me. Truthfully, I don't think I realized for a while. I was still new. There was so much I was experiencing for the first time, so one map being temporarily unavailable didn't really faze me. Nowadays, I see things a little differently. It becomes part of a pattern, the pattern of behavior interactive, ignoring very obvious problems to hit consistent release dates, prioritizing sales over anything else. And that becomes part of a whole picture, one that sees behavior struggle to rein in toxic behavior and cheaters, one that sees them take far too long to address serious issues with the health of the game, and one that sees a community becoming increasingly divided, taking the two sides of Killer and Survivor a bit too personally. Things have gotten better overall, I would like to make that clear. The recent trend is at least positive. More frequent and impactful game updates that also aren't trying to reinvent the wheel every time, as well as being generally more transparent and communicative. They've implemented a lot of good quality of life changes and attempted to reduce friction between both sides of the game with various levels of success and failure. They even delayed content to focus on game health recently, which frankly has been long overdue. Dead by Daylight is a complex picture. A picture with missing pieces, pieces upside down, and jagged edges like the jagged edges you'll get stuck on in the middle of a chase. It has a lot of negatives that are only too easy to point out, and that often get overwhelming and make the game difficult to approach or want to play. But they are only parts of the puzzle, because there are also pieces that are in the right place and of the right orientation. Some will even offer band-aids to apologise for the ones that cut you, and I'm pretty sure that's an analogy. Or maybe it's more of a metaphor. Point is that DBD has a lot of cool stuff that you will not find to the same degree anywhere else. It may be a messed up amalgamation of a lot of different things and often cannot decide what it wants to be, and it even started working worse when they upgraded to Unreal Engine 5. Somehow, but that does not supersede what the game does well. The rich, deep mechanics and the unique interactions between Survivor and Killer are the lifeblood of Dead by Daylight. When you look at the game today, it's almost too easy to ask how on earth it even made it to 9 years, and despite the obvious answer being licenses, it's because they offer a unique experience in the gaming industry which is rare enough, and it has created a very dedicated fan base which can spend an ungodly amount of hours in this game. Who am I kidding? The community. The community is the real reason Dead by Daylight is where it is, and I don't mean the big meanies in post-game chat, or the ones DCing because they lost the first chase. I mean the people that fell in love with that weird and broken mess 9 years ago, and stuck with it, because it offered something fresh and truly engrossing. I mean the people that continue to make the game a true experience to play, and help to suffuse that depth and complexity by creating a veritable wealth of content to help newcomers see what Dead by Daylight has to offer in the long term, just as they did for me. Whether that be the 7,000 years of guide content you can find on Oxtava's channel alone, never mind everyone else's, or heavily analytical content. Maybe the competitive scene from Dead by Daylight League, or the comparative showcases Hens likes to do. Or maybe the content creators dedicated to finding unique tricks and builds on both the Survivor and Killer side, like that almost 200-page clown guide. One of my current personal favourites is Puffalope's series chronicling their journey to get all the Killer adepts as a Survivor main, with each episode featuring one of the prominent players of the Killer they are playing in that episode. Not only is it a right laugh, as the British would say, but watching a borderline professional help a newcomer through the ins and outs of each Killer provides a unique insight and shows just how deep these Killers can go. This is a community that feels a passion towards this game in a way I don't think you see very commonly, and truthfully, that's why I can never walk away myself. Even though I have only played sporadically for the last 2.5 years, Dead by Daylight is still my most played game on Steam, and it's something I watch content for almost daily. And I can say with absolute certainty that I have never played anything like it, including the games that attempt to imitate it. So why do I love Dead by Daylight? Honestly, sometimes I couldn't even tell you myself. But what I do know is that the game is so imaginative. Oh god, am I sticking with that? I don't know. That's awful, but it's for the branding. It's for the branding. I would just like to reiterate here at the end of the video that this is my experience with Dead by Daylight as someone who doesn't really dedicate to one game and probably never will. It's just not my kind of style. If you want to try Dead by Daylight but you're a little put off by stuff you've seen, please do not let that stop you. Dead by Daylight is a mess, but especially when you start playing, especially if you've got like a group of friends that will play it with you, it is a blast to play, and especially in those earlier hours. It's just, there's so much wild shit that you just don't see in other games. It's a great time. There's a lot to like dig your teeth into if that's what you're into, and a lot of it is good. Whether you choose to stay past those first like couple hundred hours, that is completely up to you, and I would understand if you didn't. I just think that Dead by Daylight is truly worth experiencing, especially in the modern age where new experiences are becoming not harder to find, but they're harder to survive in this landscape. I mean, clearly I think the game's pretty good. I've spent like a pretty good chunk of the last year trying to figure out this video. All I had to do was wax poetic about it for an hour, which checks out knowing me. Thank you for watching the video. If you made it this far, please like and subscribe if you want to see more of these weirdly analytical, I think that's what I'm leaning towards, looks at specific parts of video games. What was the next bit? Leave a comment on something you really like about Dead by Daylight, or your biggest crash out, whatever's funnier. Mine personally is the unbreakable decisive strike meta that I walked into when I started playing the game. You know the one I mean, and I'll see you in the next video.